say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you.
Approaching the cinema here at Inverness to see the premiere of The Chosen Season 3. When I first heard that they were premiering it in cinemas, I'm honestly quite surprised. Who'd have thought that a show like that would premiere in the cinemas? Not even Breaking Bad would have a cinematic premiere like this, right? I mean, like Attack on Titan had like a cinema premiere. Am I right? Or I could be mistaken. Probably just trying to talk about something to pass the time. Anyway, the cinema was generous enough to also showcase the most reluctant convert. Speaking of, Christian-based content. So, Mr. Jenkins, I know you're watching this. Let's see what this has to offer.
You don't like that, do you? Good. I can use every ounce of your rage.
Looking forward to that film as well. Sorry, you weren't that great of a movie, Wakanda Forever. That film looks promising. Anyway, screen number 1 seems appropriate. In we go. The Lady Galadriel is promoting her perfume. Walk on the water, got no trouble in the mess you've been. Walk on the water. Alright, so I've just seen the premiere for Season 3 of The Chosen. What did I think of it? It was great. Thanks for watching. Of course. You want to see more of a thorough description.
Of course you do.
So I went into the cinema. Not all the cinema was filled up, but there was a fair amount of people who went in there. Probably either the size of a classroom or slightly less. Something like that. There was a nice diverse group there, including myself, of course. And something interesting happened as the premiere was happening in the cinema. I mean, it's quite a unique experience to see something like this on the big screen, you know, with The Chosen show usually being on an app. I'm so used to just opening the app and watching it on the small screen using like on the phone that I'm literally using to record this right now. Or sometimes like on my laptop. It's quite an experience to see that on like the big cinema screen. I guess up until this point, like the only way you could like see The Chosen on the big screen is if you had like a man cave or like a private cinema or something. It's interesting, something like this, it's simultaneously a large event, yet it's simultaneously somewhat, how do I describe it? Also a laid back event in a way, because this story is telling the greatest story in history. It's retelling the greatest story in history, but doing it in a new way and not with that big a budget. It's a story that all of us have heard at some point in our lives. Well, I presume most of us have heard, at least. All of us hear it, we wrestle with it at times, we come to terms with it in some way or another, so it's, in that regard, it's a big event. And I'm impressed with Dallas Jenkins and his crew. Like, you know, many of you, there might be some of you who disapprove of like Dallas Jenkins and what he's doing for various reasons, but you gotta give them respect for this much. They started out with just a crowd fundraising campaign and a short film. And even still, with their big budget, they're filming in Texas, and it's fascinating to see just how far they've come. They've started off with just like indie filmmaking, albeit from the son of the man who sold a successful book series. And now they've gone to, they're premiering their third season to the big screen. Let that sink in. Their show has become this popular to the extent that this is happening. Yeah, that really says something about the show's reputation. There's a few films that get the liberty of like a premiere. I suppose you would get TV shows that have films based on their shows, but this is just a straight up premiere for the third season. I know I shouldn't be mentioning all this, but I mention this because as I was watching in the cinema, the adverts lasted for a bit shorter than I thought, and then Mr. Jenkins himself pops up on the big screen saying, hello, I just wanted to give you a bit of an update on this and that. It's like he's an evangelical Jeff Kaplan or something. And there was this code that he was going to get to purchase more stuff. I had just turned my phone off. And then here was Dallas saying, turn your phone on again. I was like, oh, get the phone, get the perks, get the perks. But then the tag thing went away just as I got the camera ready. I was like, darn, just hypothetically speaking. That was funny. And Dallas then presented this new song. Wonderful song. I like the song. I like the music video too. Very cool visuals. Which also had imagery and clips that recapped the events of the previous two seasons for anyone who is coming into season 3 fresh, or even for people who are familiar with the show and just needed a quick reminder to what was happening up until this point. I guess it's a reminder from me that now that I was anticipating the Sermon on the Mount. I guess we all were anticipating the Sermon on the Mount. And not only do we get to see arguably one of Jesus' biggest sermons in the show, but we see it on the big screen. Let that sink in. So anyway, after that little update from Dallas Jenkins himself, as well as that song, the official premiere began, premiering the first 2 episodes of The Chosen, Season 3. And watching the whole thing, there's something that's quite striking about the series, especially when you compare it to the other adaptations of the New Testament Gospels, in that there's this mundanity to it. I mean, it probably won't strike at you at first, in a way, but you'll see the poster, you see Jesus with that little backpack rucksack of his, going on a journey, and I suppose that is thematically appropriate to what the premiere is telling. It's telling the story of how the disciples prepare themselves for this journey with Jesus Christ, as if the other 2 seasons weren't preparing them already. So essentially the plot summary of the season 3 premiere, the first 2 episodes, is that Jesus preaches the Sermon on the Mount, and people who come and gather are really impressed with the teachings of Jesus. It's unlike anything they've ever heard before. Even from Matthew, who had been hearing Jesus preaching in advance. Well, we're talking about the sermon in advance according to the events of the show. And after the events of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus and the disciples are more formally introduced to Judas Iscariot.
Judas of Kerioth.
I have chosen you 12 as my apostles.
And much like the other disciples, Judas seems to be very enthusiastic to lay down his life to follow Jesus. However, Jesus also reminds his disciples that if you really want to follow me, there's gonna be some sacrifice. This is not going to be a very convenient road for you personally. This is going to be a fairly hard road about helping and ultimately saving other people. It's not about you, it's about building your character and helping others. So essentially, when you boil down what this plot of the first 2 episodes is really about, it's basically the disciples preparing themselves for their next phase of following Jesus' ministry. Because, yes, they were following Jesus before, according to the events of the show, but the Sermon on the Mount brought Jesus' popularity from like a 10 to an 11. It's, smell of peat, I love it. Why am I recording myself smelling peat? Because I love peat! So the poster of Jesus going on a journey is quite accurate. And watching the show, watching the season 3 premiere, I suppose there's something quite striking about it, because I admit, I suppose it's been a while since I took the time to watch the show. So as I was watching season 3, I was being reminded of what made this show so unique. Is that, as well as focusing on the big events of Jesus' ministry, it also focuses on the mundanity of the people who followed Jesus Christ. And especially in season 3, where I'm seeing that the characters are applying what they've learned personally from him, being transformed by him. They're applying the teachings of forgiveness and accommodation and endurance, and there is some character growth, and there's a few laughs here and there, there's some emotional moments here and there. Essentially, the characters are learning and growing, as we all are, and Jesus is giving them some time to take a rest for a while before they go on. I suppose this rest isn't just rest for the sake of rest, it's also a means to reconcile with others. We see Matthew finding forgiveness from his own parents after all the deception and cruelty he inflicted in his convenient life as a tax collector. And it's interesting how Matthew's growth of character is signified by his growth of a beard in some regards. That's something I've noticed about beards, especially as I'm growing one of my own, is that beards aren't, symbolically speaking, I think if Jonathan Pajot was watching this video, he'd probably go ecstatic over this. There's something quite symbolic about growing a beard. It doesn't just look cool. It's not just a thing that say, oh, that guy's a dude. Beards, in a symbolic sense in storytelling, they symbolize the growth of character, the embracing of masculinity, this acceptance of responsibility. I've been seeing that lately when I was reading books 5 and 6 of like the Vinland Saga. There's a particular character who didn't have a beard before, but eventually grew one, and I suppose it's quite symbolic of him accepting responsibility in a way. And other scenes that happened, we see scenes of Judas Iscariot getting ready for the ministry, and it's we all know that Judas later betrays Jesus, so seeing his scenes play out, there's this how do I describe it, irony, I guess. I just think, oh man, if only, I mean, there's no excusing what Judas did, but you just look at this portrayal and you just think he could have had the potential to be so much better than who he later eventually became. I guess we're going to see Judas Iscariot go through like a Walter White process of eventually becoming the traitor that he is. Also, yes, as of recording this, I'm getting into Breaking Bad.
This is not myth.
Other things I've noticed, it's interesting to see that a healthy romantic marriage between Simon and his wife, and there's some really funny bits when Simon has to begrudgingly invite some of the other disciples into their house when he's trying to have some romantic private time with his wife. It's interesting to see Simon be so intimate with his wife as well, especially how a lot of people overlook this, but the Bible does endorse good sex. Have you read Song of Solomon? So yes, it's striking to be reminded that the show is focusing so much on the mundane details because it's focusing on character growth as a priority. Yeah, the show does take some creative liberties with its writing here and there, and people will have different interpretations, like depending on their theology or even like taste in writing, but there's one scene I cannot deny is going to make a deep impact in people's lives, and that's when Jesus talks with little James. I was actually quite moved by that scene, especially how, as of recording this, I was recently wrestling mentally with how to properly interpret scripture. Basically, about the Morning Star title, and recently coming across the answer that Morning Star was a divine title, not a name, showcased in the book of Job, which was written years before the book of Isaiah, likely before the time of the Patriots. It talks about how morning stars and the angels sang at God's creation, so Morning Star was actually a good title, and Jesus then referred to himself as a bright morning star by the last chapter of Revelations. And just hearing this portrayal of Jesus saying there's quite possibly a purpose for your weakness, I found that really inspiring. And which also reminds me, Jesus says you don't have to feel anything in order to make a difference.
Don't feel any different?
I don't need you to feel anything to do great things.
I think in another scene, I just look at this and I think, yes, this will go against that garbage prosperity nonsense. People need to hear this. This is not about material success. This is about spiritual growth first and foremost. There's going to be trials and tribulations, but it's all worth it in the end. So I'll catch you up on more details about the season 3 premiere later on. I just wanted to get some initial thoughts out there, in case something were to happen or something like that. Praise Jesus.